Welcome back, players. I'm Jack with 36 Cancel, and this is Coco the Weiss Cat. And today, I have a question for you players. How many cards are in your deck? Well, that's obvious. 50, right? Right, but that's not what I mean. I mean, presently, right now, in the game you're playing, when you're sitting with cards in your clock, hand, waiting room, stock, and of course, on your stage, how many of those 50 cards are left in your deck right now? Well, forgive me, you veteran TCG players who already know this, but to those who are newer, it may not occur to you that even though you can't look at your deck during gameplay unless a card lets you, you can pick up your deck and count how many cards are in it at any point in the game. You can also ask your opponent this question, and as this is considered open information, they have to tell you, which means they have to count. That said, please don't ask your opponent to count the number of cards in their deck every time they use an ability, and if you do count your deck, make sure you hold it in a way that neither you or your opponent can see any cards as you count, especially the bottom one. The fact that you can do this, however, isn't just a bit of interesting trivia about Weiss Schwarz. It's actually a very useful habit to get into if you want to improve your gameplay and how well you take your turns. I talk about this sometimes when talking about the concept of compression, which is the concept that when you refresh your deck, you want as many climaxes and as few non-climaxes to shuffle in as possible. Knowing how many cards are left in your deck is critical to making decisions that lead to better compression. But there's a lot more besides just the basic concept of compression that you can improve by knowing how many cards are in your deck and then using that information to gauge what to do that turn. So if you're interested in how to improve your gameplay just a little by doing some counting, stick around and I'll run through a few examples. And for the first few, I'm going to use this card, Budding Trust Itsuki Nakano. She has a level 1 Climax combo where on attack you ditch one and then look at up to 3 cards in the top of your deck, add all Quinn's characters or events called code word, and put the rest in the waiting room. Now this is potentially a +2 with each attack that also filters your hand, and if you attack with 3 of these and see 9 non-climax cards, you get 6 more cards that turn with just your combo, and that's pretty insane. While Itsuki is uniquely strong, many level 1 Climax combos revolve around putting cards on the top of your deck somewhere else, and then adding cards to your hand, like Airs from Mushoku Tensei, who mills 2 and then salvages based on what you mill. Shizu from Slime, Sally from Beaufry, and Rim from Fate all do the same thing. It's a very common level 1 combo ability that many players refer to as a cigarettes combo because of this event from Fate Apocrypha that does exactly this. But the key thing I want to talk about with any of these combos, and for our examples going back to Itsuki, is why it's important to count your deck before you use these combos. Let's say I play 3 of these Itsukis to the stage. I play the combo and I'm ready to plus hard. I attack, top check 3, attack, top check 3, and attack, and I only have 1 card left in my deck. Well, that sucks. I failed to take into account that for 3 of these Itsukis to work the way I want them to, I would need at least 11 cards in my deck, 9 for the top checks on all 3, and at least 2 more for the attack triggers before the third one goes off. Knowing that, maybe I would have played this turn a little differently, like maybe not brainstorming or leaving more cards in my deck from not using other abilities. Ideally, if I only have a bit of deck left and I use this combo, I'd like to pass the turn with 1 card left in my deck so that when I finish my attacks, my climax goes to the waiting room, which would help my refresh compression, and if I know how many cards my climax combo needs to work, I can sculpt my turn to make this happen. I might use cards that top check on play or on death to make sure that I have exactly the amount of cards in my deck that I need to maximize both my combo and my compression. Let's say I start my main phase and I have access to 2 of these Itsukis. I have 14 cards left in my deck. I know that using 2 of this level 1 combo will, after 3 attacks, take 9 cards from the top of my deck, 3 for each combo use and 3 for the attack triggers. So if I move to my attack phase and change nothing about my deck, I'll have 5 cards left in my deck. Now I'm also practicing good counting habits in other ways, so I know where my climaxes are. I know I have the combo in hand, 5 in my waiting room, and 1 in stock that's unfortunately pretty high up there, and paying it out at this point would tax me a lot. So I know that I have 1 climax left in deck. If I hit that climax somewhere during the course of losing 9 cards from the top of my deck on these attacks, which odds are I probably will, I'll be letting my opponent swing into me with 5 damage I can do nothing about. And players, that is a scenario you do not want to happen. So to prevent this, I'll try to do some sculpting. In fact, brainstorming here would be perfect. I mill 4 cards, not nearly as likely to hit the climax left in the deck yet, and now I have 10 cards left in deck. This is 1 over the amount of cards I'll use during the attack and combos, so that's perfect. Now if I do hit the climax when I brainstorm and I search my deck for a character, I'll only have 9 cards left. However, it's still a lot better than passing the turn with 5 cards left in deck and no climaxes. If I had a little more, or maybe a few less cards in my deck at the start of this turn, I might use some other cards that move stuff from my deck, like this top checker that lets me top check and add 1 then ditch 1, and then ditch 1 draw. That's 2 cards I can move to help me get where I want to be. So if I had 13 cards left in deck, this might be an option. Now another cool thing you can do is use cards like this other Itsuki, where on death you can pitch a card and top check 4. Let's say I attack with 14 cards left in my deck and 2 Itsuki combos, and I'll have 5 cards left in my deck after my attacks are over. If I crash this level 0 into something and let her die, I can mill another 4 of those cards before my climax hits the waiting room. Or let's say those last 5 cards still have that one climax in them. I might choose to play the odds and look at 1 or 2 cards and then stop there since I know I don't have to look at all 4 thanks to how the ability is worded. This gives me a shot at leaving my opponent to attack into a 2 or 3 card deck that has 1 climax in it, which will be very good for me. If I see the climax in the first 1 or 2 cards, oh well, I can just mill the rest and leave that 1 card deck like I originally wanted to. Do you kind of see how this works? By knowing how many cards are in your deck, and also knowing how many cards your abilities can potentially move off the top by the end of your turn, you can make better decisions. Let me give another example. Let's say you refresh, brainstorm, and immediately hit 3 climaxes. Well, you have one in your hand already, which means you have 4 in, count them, a 30-card deck. You're going to take a lot of damage if you don't do anything about this. So the answer here would be trying to make your compression better by milling out as many cards as possible and resetting the deck. But what if I can't do that? One of the worst things I could do is start using a bunch of milling and top checking effects and realize I don't have enough mill power or cards in my hand to dump the entire deck and leave myself with something terrible like 1 in 10 or God forbid 0 in 10 by the time all is said and done. This is where I have to start thinking about how many cards I can mill with the cards I have in my hand and the number of resources I can burn. I know that I have the Itsuki combo, and if I can find 3 of them, that's 12 cards on its own with 3 attacks, which is great. My brainstorm mills 4, and if I hit any climaxes, can search my deck for characters and remove even more cards. I also have this top checker that I can look at up to 4 cards on death with, and again, this top checker that can draw ditch at level 0. The question is, do I have enough of these in hand, or good enough odds to get enough of my abilities off that I can mill out the entire 30 cards of my deck and try to recompress a little bit? Well, this is where you have to do some math. Yeah, I know, it sucks, but unfortunately doing math helps you play most any card game better. If I count how many cards I'd need to discard to use my top checking abilities, combined with how I'd lose hand from just playing out the searches and characters I want to do, I can clearly see I don't have enough cards to mill out 30. Now this sucks, so what I might do instead is try to press my luck and mill out a smaller amount of cards, hoping that my climaxes are nearer to the bottom of the deck, so I might use the Itsuki combo without milling out anything else this turn if I have 1 or 2. If I lose another climax or God forbid more, okay, it happens. That's Weiss, and RNG is a factor. At the end of the day, counting cards in your deck doesn't automatically give you the result you want, but it does give you an idea of what your odds are and how to play them. What's also worth mentioning is that in this scenario, refreshing 7 climaxes and 34 cards isn't too amazing in terms of compression, and I probably could have set myself up better for this turn some time ago. But knowing how to do this will come with practice. As a final example, let's go to the opponent's side. Let's say again you're being a good player by keeping track of your opponent's climaxes. You know that they have 1 in stock, 6 in the waiting room, and because of how the game's been going, you seriously doubt they have 1 in their hand. So you're assuming they have 1 in deck. Now this on its own is very useful information to us, but it's even more useful when you ask them to count how many cards are in their deck. Let's say they have 6 cards. You can potentially eke out a lot of free damage here, but you need to be smart. Let's say you're looking at some open lanes here and you have some 1 soul characters. If you swing, you'll have at least 2 soul in each lane. If they have 6 cards in their deck and 1 climax, that's a guaranteed 4 damage if you swing in for 2 each time, as they can only cancel 1 attack with those numbers. Keep in mind, however, if you trigger, you'll be going in for 3, giving you a much lower chance to hit as much uncancelable damage. Playing a climax that adds soul is also probably not a great move either, as if you swing in for 3 on an open lane and then trigger for 4, there's a very high chance that your opponent cancels on 3 or 4, and then even has a greater chance of canceling if you swing in for more than how many cards are left in their deck afterward. Now this calculus is going to depend on their compression and how many you know they're shuffling back in with, and the answer is going to differ from scenario to scenario. However, the key is, by knowing how many cards are in their deck, you can maximize how much damage you deal to your opponent while they're vulnerable. Now it is a bit cumbersome to have your opponent count their entire discard pile when they refresh so you know what their ratio is. What you can do instead is, when your opponent refreshes, just take a look at their stock, hand, clock, level zone, stage, and memory to see how many cards are outside of the deck, and you'll get a general idea of what their numbers are so long as you're keeping track of their climaxes, which is not only a good habit, but it's much easier. Knowing generally how many cards are in your opponent's deck, as long as you know where their climaxes are, will tell you a lot about what you should be swinging for. Like, if your opponent has 7 climaxes and 30 cards, roughly 1 in 4 cards is going to be a climax, and swinging for 3 damage 3 times by playing a climax of your own has a good chance to only do 3 or so damage, since you're likely going to see more than 1 climax in 9 or more cards with those numbers, meaning that your opponent will probably cancel at least twice. Now this is soul math, which I could make an entire video on if I was qualified in any way to, but knowing roughly how many cards are in your opponent's deck is an important starting point in making these big brain calculations. Going back to just counting cards though, one thing I want to hit on before I let you go is not to forget the variables. For example, if you're playing a deck with bar triggers or book triggers, I know, imagine playing those, you could end up taking another card off the top of your deck during your attacks and thus not have as many cards left as you expected. Also, if you brainstorm as part of milling your deck out and then you search, draw, or top check, that's more to take into account as part of your initial calculus for the turn. Finally, there are backups that let you top check, commonly called Leafa counters, like this Rugier from Mushoku Tensei or this Leafa from SAO. They make the whole leaving 1 or 2 cards in your deck thing a little better since they let you mill out your deck on your opponent's turn. Putting that last card in your hand with a Leafa count when your opponent swings for 3 damage could definitely be the difference between taking it or not when you have a 1-card deck. One last thing though, if you're doing that whole leaving your opponent with a small deck with a few climaxes or a deck of 1 card with no climaxes and a strong refresh coming, there are cards like stock swaps or combos that shuffle cards back into your deck like Ruxia or Kurumi. If you know your opponent's playing one of those effects, be careful not to walk into it, because if you lead them a deck like that, Ruxia, Kurumi, and cards like them can just kill you. Alright, that's enough for now. I know a lot of you might think this is dead obvious, but believe it or not everyone is as smart as you. To those who aren't the big brain gigachats that already know this stuff, I hope this was helpful as you evolve your gameplay and move forward. I'd be lying if I said I didn't know this coming in, but I had a very long history of playing card games before Weiss that I was a lot better at than Weiss. I'd also be lying if I said I'd do this as much as I should though. See players, it's one thing to know how to do this stuff, but it's another to practice and make sure you're keeping your brain in gear when you're trying to improve. Make a habit of employing what you learn each game, and you'll improve sooner than you think. And as always, thanks for watching. Peace.